Hi, I'm Simon Isaacs, and this is our Anything in Print podcast.
As consumers, we demand omni-channel, and the industry does support that. But as I say, once I became aware of this environmental impact, I started to set about an agenda of looking to educate and try and make change for good. And I became addicted to it, really. And the more research I did, the more I realised just what we've been doing to our planet. And post-Second World War, hyperconsumption starts. Plastic's an incredible product that was developed, and it does incredible things. It's changed the impact it's had on medical science, for example. We couldn't do without plastic. Plastic has a place in our world, absolutely. But for cards, my view is that we could change that. And I became so passionate about it. I was kind of shunned for it initially because the print industry that made plastic cards didn't really like what I was saying because it cannibalized what they were doing, and it was an uphill battle for nearly a decade, actually. Research I did just opened my eyes even more to how simple a change this really should be, and for brands and retailers that were starting to take note of the environmental, the smaller brands and business, I would say, are braver. They don't want to have plastic. They do want to have something completely sustainable that reflects on their brand. It's almost at a personal level. If I'm going to put something into the market, I need to demonstrate that I've been considerate in the way I've approached that.
So hi, and welcome to the 8th episode, series 2 of our Anything in Print podcast. My name's Tim Carter, one of the leaders at the graphic communications team here at Ricoh UK. We really hope you're enjoying the podcast, but if you haven't caught up yet on the previous episodes, I'd really encourage you to do so, as we cover the hottest verticals to be involved in at the moment, discussing changing customer demands, business transformation, and improving customer experience in print. We dedicated series 2 to champions of print, people and businesses that drive the innovation forward, discover new ways of doing things, and make bold decisions and have a vision for their print operation, which is significant. Printing's a really innovative and collaborative industry, and we're particularly happy to see operations who don't do print as their core business, but strongly believe in the power of print, its place in today's economy, and use it to the best of its abilities. In the end, print is persuasive, print's engaging, and most of all, print can be very sustainable. So, on that note, I'm really pleased to welcome Graham Lycett today, the Managing Director of Jellyfish Livewire, which is a marketing agency which is heavily invested in print, and also a Managing Director of Green's Gift Cards. So, morning, Graham, and welcome. It's great to have you along with us today. So before we sort of get into the bones of it, we might want to just do a deeper dive into yourself in terms of, let's start with you, your work and your background.
Thanks. Morning, Tim. Good to be here. I never get tired of telling this story, really. I've become incredibly passionate about our business, as most business owners do, but it all goes back to 2006, where as a print manager, we were asked to get involved with a gift card project, which was new in the UK. It was an American legacy, the US market 5 years more mature than the UK. US giant fintech platform that provides these gift card programs came and acquired a client of ours in the UK to get their European foothold. And very quickly, we were thrust into the arena of gift cards. And the long and short of it is we launched the very first gift card mall, or managed the launch of the very first gift card mall in the UK for Sainsbury's. That meant 600 odd stores, millions of cards being produced, POS units, etc. But it struck me incredibly early on that producing gift cards from plastic, which is what we did, because that was the form, that was how cards were produced in the US and around the world. Initially, I didn't question it, but it became apparent to me very quickly that plastic was over-engineered for the use case of a card that would sit on a rack for most of its life, and then either in a drawer or in a purse, and then eventually be redeemed. So, we got involved in that industry, and I say it just raised questions very quickly to me, and that's what set me off about looking to change things.
Really interesting. And I think, from the limited time that I've got to know you, it's very clear and very obvious to me that there's so much passion, that you invest in everything you do. And it's really evident in terms of your passion and commitment to all of the projects you've been involved in. And as I understand, you've been awarded the Honoured Industry Contributor by the Gift Card and Voucher Association. So you must be really proud. So tell us a bit more about how, your own drive, and how you want to ultimately get rid of plastic gift cards, which you've seen, as a historical and legacy scenario.
Yeah, I mean, getting the award last year was incredibly humbling, actually, but yeah, very rewarding. But to your point about my passion, as I said, when we sort of established the fact that plastic seemed over-engineered, it also made production management very difficult because there's only so many providers. So the incumbents were, there was only few and far between. So it gave us a lack of flexibility. So the first thing I started to look at was alternative substrates. And the more I learned about alternative substrates and production methods within print that would do this, it became apparent to me very quickly, and this is before we talked about the environment being an issue back then in 2006-07, it became apparent to me that we actually had a problem with plastic pollution. Back then we considered it to be rubbish or garbage, didn't really consider the impact on our planet. So my research into how we could produce something that was going to be quicker, easier to produce and more cost effective compared to plastic soon turned to what's the impact of plastic on our environment, not just how it's created from crude oil, but ultimately right through its manufacturing process, extrusion, and then ultimately what we used it for, and then end of life. So my attention's moved away from kind of the commercial outcomes, if you like, more to the environmental impact. And I became addicted to it, really. And the more research I did, the more I realized just what we've been doing to our planet. And post-Second World War, hyperconsumption starts. Plastic's an incredible product that was developed, and it does incredible things. It's changed the impact it's had on medical science, for example. We couldn't do without plastic. Plastic has a place in our world, absolutely. But for cards, my view is that we could change that. And I became so passionate about it. I set this agenda of trying to change the industry, the UK retail industry that uses gift cards. It's an industry today that's worth nearly £8 billion. That's what we as consumers spend on these gift cards and gifting generally. It's mixed between physical and digital now, as in digital online. As consumers, we demand omni-channel, and the industry does support that. But as I say, once I became aware of this environmental impact, I started to set about an agenda of looking to educate and try and make change for good. As I say, became an obsession. And we looked at all sorts of different substrates, but ultimately paper is the only way we came back to, paperboard. And that was it. I felt compelled to talk to brands, retailers, distributors to say there's a better way of doing this, and paperboard is the way forward with that. And we don't need plastic. The job can be done with paperboard as it can be with plastic. It carries the same information. It's a brand, a value, an experience, and some data on there. So the substrate is neither here nor there, but it opened up such a vast opportunity for production and took away the reliance on a number of key incumbent manufacturers that dictated the market, dictated lead times, how quickly you could get a card through from design through to being in retail. So opening that up became my focus, really. And it's quite a funny story. I was kind of shunned for it initially because the print industry that made plastic cards didn't really like what I was saying because it cannibalized what they were doing. And my objective was to do something good, not to do that necessarily, to cannibalize their market. But the one or two brands that did open up to the idea and were receptive, and I still find it funny to say that it was the Rugby RFU was my first commercial customer at Twickenham that wanted a paperboard card because they'd already noted the fact that ESG and corporate responsibility, environmental responsibility was becoming a thing. And they were the earliest adopter we had. And that was in, I think, 2008, we did their very first paperboard card. So yeah, that was the beginning of that piece, really.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, and just to develop the topic and the theme a little bit further, I mean, ESG and sustainability is very, very high on Ricoh's agenda. It always has sat very high for many years and indeed for decades. I understand and accept and acknowledge the challenges you have, because it's really a hearts and minds exercise, I would guess. And, being able to convince stakeholders, people, industries, to move away from something, in this instance, plastic, to a different scenario requires a huge amount of time and effort on anybody's part. So talk to me about some of the challenges you faced along the way in terms of that hearts and minds exercise, and some of the outcomes that you can reflect on positively.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It was an uphill battle for nearly a decade, actually. I got to the point where I even wrote a white paper on the topic to try and give it some credibility, and it was free to anyone who wanted to consume that information. But again, that research I did just opened my eyes even more to how simple a change this really should be, and for brands and retailers that were starting to take note of the environmental information that was starting to flow about understanding our impact. The ones that really did understand and embrace it were brave enough to jump in with me, really. And then there was there's quite an anecdotal point, really, but as we went through this journey, the biggest restriction, or the biggest barrier I faced was the perception that paper was less valuable than plastic. So a £20 gift card somehow would be not worth £20 if it was on paperboard or compared to plastic. That was the kind of mindset I was facing. And so what we had to try and compensate that with all the benefits that traditional print on paperboard allows you to do. So it's more like premium packaging. We could do more embellishments, more finishes. So I would try and overcome that. There was obviously a price point to manage as well. So expectations around it, well, it should be cheaper because it's paper. Well, at the beginning, it isn't necessarily the case, because it's just the substrate. Everything else is the same, the ink on substrate, and then the personalization and all the nuances that are specific to gift cards with variable data. So there were some real challenges, but we got to a point where at the time, Apple's iTunes was the biggest distributor of plastic cards at the time, and they were the anchor brand on most gift card malls. And Steve Jobs, when he was with us, got up on stage one of the days and said, right, we're switching out plastic for paperboard because it's our environmental responsibility to do so. So I always jokingly say he stole my thunder, stole my idea. But what it really meant for me is if one of the world's biggest brands recognized the impact of plastic cards, then I wasn't alone. I wasn't wrong. There was some credibility given to my rants and raving on about trying to change plastic. So
yeah,
that was kind
of a bad endorsement to have from Steve Jobs himself. Yeah,
indeed. So that kind of made it a little bit more serious, put the spotlight on us a bit. And what followed from that was paper manufacturers suddenly thought, oh, new market, because you're talking about an awful lot of cards. If you think the UK market is worth, say, around about 8 billion today, my estimate is it's 800 million to 1 billion cards are produced to feed that in one form or another, whether it's gift, loyalty, or membership. So it's a significant piece of commercial business for printers. So we had paper manufacturers sort of say, oh, we've got a material that's perfect for this, which, to be fair, any fiber-based product compared to plastic is significant improvement in terms of its environmental impact. And we worked with one or two of them. We worked with a couple of merchants, a couple of manufacturers, and then ultimately we were introduced to Igerson from Sweden, and their product now, Invercoat Duo, which we use for all of our cards, has become the kind of staple product to go for gift, loyalty, membership, particularly in the UK. And I know it's sort of proliferating into Europe and starting to get into the States as well. But we haven't looked back since that. So we chose their product for lots of reasons, both its mechanical and technical values, how easy it is to print, and even more so, Ricoh approved that it's a very printable sheet. And obviously we'll get on to that evolution from traditional LIFO to digital print production. And then the next domino effect, if you like, for us was Blue Planet, where we as consumers suddenly had this light bulb moment where we realized through the wonders of David Attenborough's television programs just how bad the situation was. Gift cards don't really feature in that. You don't see those provocative photographs, with animals in some sort of distress with a plastic card associated to it. But what it does, it reinforces the fact that we as a species need to do more to protect our planet. So all of these points just kept reinforcing my enthusiasm and passion to change for good. And I any type of card application, quite frankly, now. And that's where we're at. Is, you know, it's not just gift and loyalty. We've moved on to any type of card application, and the idea was to generate a range of products that dealt with all those different problems that are linked to plastic cards.
Yeah, you're right. The Blue Planet episodes, I think, were a light bulb moment for most people, for society, and it was very, very powerful in terms of what was communicated there. And I'm interested, though, because part of this exercise and this project that you've been pursuing, you're promoting paper or card as a viable alternative to the standard methodologies that we used previously using plastic. But there's still a perception around print that print is not sustainable. It's not environmentally friendly because we have to cut trees down to make paper and board. How do you overcome that? And what do you say to those individuals that maybe have that perception, which I believe is wrong, and I'm sure you do, but I'm interested to hear how you would respond to that as a potential objection.
Yeah, that whole concept of, yes, we cut trees down, and in fact, in our videos of the paper mill, when we go up to the forest up in Sweden, we actually show that as part of the process, because there's no point pretending it doesn't happen. But trees, when they're in a well-managed environment dictated by the FSC, they're a renewable crop. They take a very long time to grow, but there's an entire ecosystem where well-managed forests have a part to play. And the Egerton story is probably the easiest way to answer that question. This is what I say to customers if I'm faced with that. Well, why don't we use recycled paper as a start rather than virgin fiber? Well, I can answer that as well. But ultimately, trees are planted in this context as a renewable, sustainable resource. You know, the trees are planted. They take 60 to 80 years to reach maturity. And actually, we took a client recently to the forests, and they actually said, "Oh, what point would the tree naturally come to its end of life? And then what would happen?" Well, naturally, after say 100 years or more, depending if it's spruce or pine, it would probably fail. It would come to the end of its natural life, fall over, and it would break down and go back into its biodiversity, and other trees would grow. So there's a natural cycle to the way trees are developed and grow. And the process that Egerton have is that for every one tree they harvest, because that is the word, not cut down, it's harvested, they plant 3. One usually falls by the wayside because nature does its thing. There'll be another one that gets kind of harvested halfway through its life. And then ultimately the best tree out of the 3, which in terms of yield of timber, will go its full duration of, I say, 80 odd years. And the bit that people sort of don't really understand is they think rainforests and being absolutely wiped off the face of the planet and replaced with something that's not as good. Whereas well-managed forests, you are just replanting a crop. So there's a cycle there, and we need to keep replanting trees because trees are the planet's lungs. It's what keeps us alive. They absorb the CO2 that's damaging our planet. So we absolutely need them. And the paper industry doesn't cut trees down and not replace them. It cuts them down, replaces them. In actual fact, Egerton plant more than they harvest. So the forests grow every year, bit by bit. So it's a very sustainable process. And invariably, when I throw that answer to people, they kind of go, oh, okay. And then when you compare that to, say, virgin fiber to recycled paper material, that's the other argument I have to overcome. The process of taking virgin fiber and turning that into paperboard uses less energy than recycling that paper. So there's a bigger carbon footprint to the recycling there's a bigger recycling process to engineer paperboard into de-inking and then pulping again and then turning into more paper. So there's an energy footprint to that. Whereas the paper that we use, again, the paper mill, they uses almost 0 fossil fuels in the process. So it's actually carbon neutral paper, if you like, because they use natural resources, hydro, they use biomass energy to run their facility. So to take that virgin fiber and engineer it into paperboard, there's no carbon footprint. In fact, we had a study done by Carbon Quota bioscientists with expertise in print. They did a calculation for a client of ours who was on a B Corp journey to measure from seed through to not just gate, but then consumer use and post-consumer decomposition by going into landfill or recycling. And we have a a carbon footprint value, if you like, a CO2 value of a standard, what we call CR80, so credit card size card, printed 4-color litho in this instance because of the volume, with a bio-based coating and then punched to shape and all of the various touch points through its production life cycle. But it has a carbon value of around 11 grams per card. Now, that doesn't mean anything until you put that into some sort of context. I read a really interesting book, which I would encourage everyone to get, How Bad Are Bananas by Professor Mike Berners-Lee, where he does he's calculated the carbon footprint of pretty much everything in our daily lives. And if you take a banana and go through the similar life cycle, so from seed through to gate to the supermarket to consumer use and then discarding the skin, the equivalent life cycle for a banana is 110 grams. So you can immediately start to add some visualization, if you like, in terms of how small the carbon footprint is for paper-based products, specifically in this case, the Egerton paperboard, where it's carbon neutral in its manufacturing process. So again, innovators in their space, they're leading the way, but lots of paper manufacturers are doing the same thing using biomass. So there's a huge benefit there compared to other substrates. And more manufacturers of printing equipment like Ricoh are taking that into account when you're designing your new machinery and your consumables. So we're about to do a study with the whole process on digital as well, so digital print using the same material, but we'll have that outcome soon as well, which I'll be very pleased to share with you.
So yeah, well, let's I mean, that quite nicely moves on to the next topic of discussion, because you've mentioned just then and previously how digital print as a processing methodology is supporting your initiatives, and this is obviously very interesting for me, given the hat that I wear mainly Monday to Friday. So can you tell us a little bit more about the project Green Cards and how you've been collaborating with Ricoh and what the outcomes have been so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so under our Green Gift Cards brand, which was a brand we created right back at the beginning to kind of help position the solution we were developing. Initially, it was focused on our large volumes that we were doing anyway for a lot of the high street brands and the various partners and processors we work with. And we kind of nailed that high volume, just moving from plastic to paperboard, that's done. But for me, really, it was actually the beginning of the pandemic. I was considering, well, what's next? How else can we apply the same principles to the rest of the broader card market? And we get a lot, we were then and still do today, get a lot of inquiries from smaller businesses. Now, the smaller brands and business, I would say, are braver. They don't want to have plastic. They do want to have something completely sustainable that reflects on their brand. It's almost at a personal level. If I'm going to put something into the market, I need to demonstrate that I've been considerate in the way I've approached that. So we were getting a lot of inquiries from brands that wanted to either test the idea of gift or loyalty programs, or just don't need very many because they're a single site. So there wasn't really a credible solution. Digital obviously was the way to deal with that. And I mean, that's not new news. Digital is set up for short run, quick turnaround and variable data. So I was trying to find a way of applying that principle to the card world. And the biggest restriction, of course, is caliper, thickness of the material, and digital presses are limited on that. We did start some studies and some projects with manufacturers to try and get to that point, but nothing really kind of got where we needed to go. I was introduced to Ricoh 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago, and I have to say, your guys up at Telford, I have to name check Andy Campbell in particular, who's been a huge supporter and a champion of what we've been trying to achieve, and it's become incredibly successful. So there was a market demand for short run, quick turnaround cards for the independent brands, and that had to come from digital. So we had to go from a B1 or B2 LIFO format to SRA3, where we could do very short numbers with zero make ready wherever possible. So there's an environmental consideration there as well. We're not having to use 5-10% overs just to get to where we need to be. So some of the lessons I'd learned from a previous effort at this, we applied to Ricoh, but you guys have absolutely embraced it and smashed it. So for a year, we've been running with one of your customers, and they've run 2 machines that have been upgraded to accommodate the extra thick material. So we're running a 660 micron thick Invercoat. I know there's ambitions to push that beyond that, which I know is Andy and his team are doing. But we've been successfully producing short run cards from say 100 to 5,000 using digital print technology. And not just that, and this is the bit that really excites me. Printing short run is fine, but the power of variable data that comes from digital was what I really wanted to get to with gift cards, because the traditional process of gift card production is you print your sheet, you cut your cards to shape, and they go on a different line where they have a high-speed inkjet with all the variable data applied to it. There's too many machines, too many processes, too many steps. So what digital does, of course, is allows us to print imagery, artwork, and the variable data all in a single pass. So it's more efficient, far quicker. The Holy Grail was to get to that point and be able to do the finishing aspect, i.e. cutting the cards, punching them out to shape, and maintaining a sequential order. And again, working with Ricoh, we've achieved exactly that. And as I said, it's been running for over a year successfully at one of your PSPs. So that's exactly what we do. We're printing the sheets, 18 up, it goes straight off the back of the press, onto a punch. The variable data is imposed in such a way that means that when the cards come off the punch, it goes into a hopper, and all the operator's got to do is pick the cards out of the hopper in the right order to maintain that sequential order. We've got camera verification, so we've got to make sure that we have, no cards are missed, because every single card is value. So all of that giant, if you like, industrial process that the traditional plastic card manufacturers have been using, even with paperboard, because they had to follow suit, is still now looking fairly dated and over-engineered for the purpose, whereas Ricoh's digital platform gives you complete agility, flexibility, and speed to react, and say it all fits in a very small footprint. So we've been running that successfully, and really the next part of that journey is to help the bigger brands understand the benefit. And you talked about the challenge of changing mindset early on around substrate. I'm having the same fresh set of challenges to try and get the big brands to stop thinking print volumes based on a unit price target, based on forecast sales, that limits creativity, because you can't change your artwork as readily as you might want to, whereas digital also opens that up. It allows you to be far more creative with what you're printing. So 18 up, we'd have 18 different bits of artwork, and there's no real impact to the cost. It's just the management, the workflow. Whereas traditional life, though, it's a bit of a nightmare. Planning sheets up on a B1 and trying to get your yield the way you want it to be, and all the time that goes associated with that. So digital really is when it comes to cards, is opening a whole new world of opportunity. I keep saying to some of these big brands, what sells in the Northeast might not sell in the Southwest. If you change the artwork, because your demographics are different, you could make it resonate. You can also be more reactive to being in the moment, being relevant. And you could even link your gift cards to your TV campaign. If you imagine now, for example, as we're building up to the peak season, if we were to have TV commercial assets reproduced on physical cards in store, consumers are immediately going to link the two, right? So again, digital print allows for that, whereas traditional litho just doesn't. So the next challenge for me is to try and convince the big brands to print based on what they sold, not what they think they're going to sell. And to be brave and use them as marketing collateral, not just a transactional device with a value on it. So that's kind of next steps, really.
No, I mean, it's so exciting, and we've seen the results, and we're astounded by what's been achieved in terms of the impact, as you just suggested, by having the convenience of digital, being able to produce the quantities at the right quantity in the right time, and having content that's absolutely relevant. But it's interesting that that there's a continued focus on your part, to change the mindset. So it's not just about being reactive to a situation, a season, or a situation that may have happened. It's about being proactive and understanding how you can use that variable content to resonate with a particular point in time that's going to create the biggest impact. So and now doing it on a board media rather than it being plastic. All of these things coming together, I think, represents a really exciting opportunity moving forward, and we are, we're really pleased and proud to be part of that. And I think we're only just scratching the surface. I think there's a lot more that will follow in the future. So no, it's great. It's great. Really, really interesting. So just in terms of bringing today's session to a conclusion, any advice for anyone looking to disrupt a business sector for profitable growth. Clearly, you have been and will continue to be highly disruptive in changing the mindset, in moving the traditional thought processes and indeed production process to something in the future that's going to be far more sustainable, that's aligned more to ESG objectives. So anybody listening to the podcast today, any advice to them in terms of that disruptive capability and that disruptive power that you've been able to very successfully use and utilize to, achieve what's been achieved so far?
Well, obviously you need to believe solely in what you're doing. That's the first thing. But and I say I've become very passionate about trying to make change for good, no matter how small it might appear to be. But I'd say be brave. In industry generally, there's a status quo that is just ready and waiting to be challenged all the time. And it's smaller businesses, predominantly, I think, like ours, that are well positioned to challenge the status quo. Some of the bigger manufacturers might not like me for saying that again, but innovation's got to come from somewhere. So I guess the key thing really is always, it's very challenging when you're innovating, is you can innovate for innovation's sake. However, you need to have a market that's ready and receptive and commercially viable. So that's the key. There are some basics you got to run. If you're focused on the environment as your driver, which we are, we know that's not going to relent. That's going to continue to be a challenge to manufacturers and brands and retailers that put physical products into market. So we know that still has a long way to go. And we've done that with our new EnviroCard product, which is a hybrid of digitally printed and being ready for dye sub overprint. So that's another thing that we're developing and we're about to launch globally. But I would say really genuinely is understanding the challenges that are out there from an environmental perspective, understanding the limitations that current manufacturing provides. Find yourselves a really receptive partner like we've done with Ricoh, who are prepared to take ideas and do their own due diligence, of course, because you guys had to qualify my ranting and raving about getting digital print to work, to understand that there's a business case there as well, which is what we did. We worked collaboratively to make sure we understood that there was a commercial business case ultimately for Ricoh customers to benefit from. And that's what we're hoping to do is now with your new engine, new platforms are out there, you're providing your customers with a new revenue stream, a new opportunity into a market they couldn't break into before. But yeah, to your point, be brave, believe in what you're trying to do. And in my instance, all I can really say is that it sounds a bit cliche, but I genuinely want to make a difference. When my time is done, I wanted to leave a legacy of saying I did something for good. And that offsets all the things that I do to the planet, because I drive a car and I fly and so on. But I try to be considerate, but it's very, very difficult to be as green as we need to be. So if everybody in any industry can incrementally make a positive impact, overall, we'll get to where we need to be, which is reversing the damage we've done to the planet.
Fantastic. Well, Graham, thank you for participating in today's podcast. I personally found it absolutely fascinating to hear your experiences and your stories, and the passion that I made reference to at the beginning of the podcast has absolutely come through. That passion, that commitment, that determination to continue to be disruptive in a positive way, I think will be fundamental to the projects that you've got ongoing, and indeed the projects that you've got planned in the future that we are at Ricoh very proud to be part of. So I'd like to say thank you for listening to this podcast. It's been a really fascinating conversation. And I think what today's podcast has really done is it's endorsed the power of print. It's endorsed the power of print in terms of its ability to distinguish and differentiate from other methods of communication, but now doing it in a more environmentally and sustainable way. And I think that this will continue to evolve and develop. And perhaps in the next 6 to 12 months, Graham, we should get back together, reconvene, and maybe update on the progress that's been made. But again, thanks very much for participating in today's podcast. Thanks for listening. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Thanks very much.
Ricoh.